wasn't right. Okay. Okay, that's that. Let's come back over here. And let's make that bigger. Okay, that's that. Yeah, that's better. Thomas missed the first encounter because he was absent. And this is an example of distance from community and how it leads to distance from revelation. Thomas was not within his community, the community of the disciples. And so when the other disciples were blessed, Thomas was not. And then when they mentioned it to him, he was still doubting, hence the term doubting Thomas. So this is a good example of distance from spiritual community, weakening spiritual clarity. I think I was supposed to ask you guys some questions. All right, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. We have a tendency to disconnect when life gets hard. We have a tendency to disconnect when prayers aren't answered. And we have a tendency to disconnect when disappointment sets in. Isolation then feeds doubt. Interesting. Isolation feeds doubt. You can't afford to be missing when God is moving. And we started off with the question, have you ever believed in something but still struggled to fully trust it? What do you think of that? Do you agree with that? I'm listening. Okay. There we go. Yeah, that's better. So what was something that you were believing in, or that you were believing in, but you did not fully have faith in? So how do you think Thomas felt when the other disciples came to him and said, we have seen the Lord? But he wasn't there, so he didn't see the Lord. Do you think he felt disconnected? I think that's a better way to ask that. Do you think that he may have felt like he was missing while God was moving? What is going on here? Okay. Thomas says in verse 25, you know what, let me bring this up over here. Week 3. Oh, no. Yeah. Okay. Thomas says in verse 25, until I see, I will not believe. And I think a lot of us, from time to time, may take that same position. We want, and we touched on this last week, we want God to show us why did that happen? We want God to show us before we believe, before we see it. Am I right? This is really driving me crazy. Right. And why do you think that is? Do you think that's like the position of Thomas? I'm not going to believe until this. And how does that apply to you? Because what we see is we see Thomas setting conditions for belief. That's exactly what he's doing. He says, I'm not going to believe this until I see his hands, until I see the holes, until I see the hole in his side. He's setting conditions for his belief. How many of us do that? And how do we do it? Right. And what's the fix for that? Possibly. Family, bear with me. We're having all kinds of problems here. Okay, that's that. Oh, here we are over here. Oh, okay. I'm going to shut that down. We're not going to use that platform this week. Okay, right. Right. So this is not curiosity. This is guarded faith. We guard our faith too, just like Thomas did. And I heard somebody say it over here earlier when I was asking the question, what we thought it was. When we do that, what did we think it was? We're guarded because we want to believe, we do believe, but we have doubt. Because doubt demands control before it believes. Thomas says, I will trust God. Sometimes I will trust God when I see results. And this is what I was alluding to just a few minutes ago. I will say, I'll believe when things change. That's conditional faith, family. And conditional faith limits our growth. God wants to bless us through Jesus. He does. He sent Jesus that we might have life and have life more abundantly. Am I correct? So if he's trying to bless us, he's trying to give us a more abundant life, but yet we're holding back. We're setting conditions to what he wants to do. We're setting conditions to how we want him to do something. How does that work? Make it make sense, right? That's conditional faith. And you can't grow under conditional faith because it'll never move. You'll never come to full faith by setting conditions. Let God do what God is going to do. Faith doesn't say, prove it. Faith says, I trust you even though I don't see it. And we're socialized like that. We're socialized to like that. Good, bad, or indifferent. And the hardest thing to do is to unlearn something and then have to relearn it. The relearning part is the easy part. The unlearning part is the hard part. But even though Thomas has set conditions, Jesus meets with him anyway. Look at verses 26 and 27. And after 8 days, his disciples were again inside, and Thomas with them. Jesus came, the doors being shut, and stood in the midst, and said, peace to you. Then he said to Thomas, reach your finger here and look at my hand. Reach your hand here and put it in my side. Do not be unbelieving, but believing. Jesus meets Thomas anyway, in his doubt. Jesus returns specifically for Thomas. He invites him to touch his wounds. And Jesus will do the same thing for us, for you, for me, for us. Jesus will meet you at your point of struggle, and he will not leave you there. Catch that piece. Jesus will meet you at your point of struggle. And we talked about this a little bit last week. But because we don't know the voice of God, we have a tendency to miss him. Because we don't know the voice of God, we have a tendency to miss him, and then we wonder why he hasn't shown up. Indeed, has shown up, you just didn't hear him. Am I right? Do you think Thomas felt ashamed about his doubt? Do you think Thomas felt shame or shameful about his doubt? Yes, no, maybe so. Would you feel shame? Do you feel shame when you're doubtful? More specifically, when you're doubting God, or do you feel shame? Yeah, I should ask it that way. I don't think that Thomas felt shameful. I don't. I think he regretted not being there when the other disciples were there when Jesus first appeared to them, but I don't think he had shame. Some might argue that he had shame, but I wouldn't argue that. And I would listen to the argument because I'm not the end all be all. Amen. But now there are some people that walk among us that feel shame or are ashamed of doubt. And I suppose once we're no longer doubting, we could feel ashamed for having been doubtful. But Jesus doesn't shame. He reveals. And he does that because he's not intimidated by our doubt. He wasn't intimidated by Thomas's doubt. And he's not intimidated by our doubt. Rick, you all are going to have to give me a higher table next week, please. He just refuses to let it define him. So, Jesus is not intimidated by our doubt, and he refuses to let it define him. He's not going to allow us to put him in a pocket, in a box. He's not going to allow us to limit what he can do for us. He's not going to allow us to limit him trying to spur growth in us. He's not going to allow us to limit him and what he has called us to do. And sometimes, no, I don't want to say it that way because you are going to get mad. Sometimes we limit God, or we try to limit God, and then wonder why God hasn't moved. See what I'm saying? God revealed himself. And once God revealed himself, what's interesting, and I said earlier about that we limit God, we put conditions on our faith, on God, just like Thomas did. Thomas said, I'm not going to believe it. I'm not going to believe it until I see A, B, and C. Now, Jesus showed up, showed Thomas A, B, and C. Thomas then began to believe, and he proclaims, my Lord and my God. Now, that's a declaration statement. My Lord and my God. Jesus did this based off of Thomas's doubt, and now Thomas is my Lord and my God. And this is the strongest confession in John's gospel. That declaration, my Lord and my God, is doubt transforming into deep conviction. So let me use this example. How many times have we been, this table's too little. How many times have we been in a situation that didn't quite go the way we wanted to go, only to find out later on down the line that what we didn't get, what God gets. Does that make any sense? Example, Let's say you're running late for work, but you don't know why you're running late, and then you're delayed on the way to work as you're already late. You get to work, you're kind of like, huffing and puffing all out and everything. You're kind of anxious. You kind of, I can't believe this happened, blah, 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 blah. And then you later on, you find out that had you left on time, or that there was an accident, had you left on time, you may have been the victim in that accident. Is that a good example? You see the connection I'm trying to make? How many have you experienced something like that? Maybe not that severe, not that drastic. That's happened to me more than once, more than 5, more than 10 times. And sometimes I didn't see the blessing for years down the line. But because I was kind of in tune, when I thought back and I thought through the line of events, it made sense. It made me more grateful. Does that make sense? How many of you have experienced something like that? That's kind of where we're going here. As leading us to when doubt is confronted, faith becomes stronger than before. Can you see that? Think about some of those examples that you all just shared with me, and think about how your faith became stronger than before. Think about the times when you were doubtful of God, and that a doubt, once confronted, made your faith stronger than before. Does that make sense? I'm trying to make it simplified for you all. We talked about this in the sermon on Sunday. And for those who missed the sermon, you can go back and look at it on Facebook, and you can go back and look at it on YouTube. Right. So what we end up doing is wrestling with God, wrestling with faith, wrestling with God through Jesus. And wrestling's not a bad thing. It really isn't. I hear some things that people say, and it's just off the wall. People who wrestle often become the strongest believers. It's all right to go back and forth with God and question, God, I thought this, God, help me with that. God, no, I don't believe. It's all right. Because in the end, it's going to make you stronger believers. It's going to deepen your faith, especially if you're already paying attention to what God is saying and doing in your life based off of the doubt that you've had. So that in the event, as you go down the line further in your life and you have to confront doubt again, it's easier to confront doubt because you've already been there. Not to say that you should be there again, but it happens. You've already been there. You know the saying, if he did it before, he can do it again. I don't think a lot of people believe that anymore because it's become so commercialized. And it became commercialized because of a song. I don't know who sang the song. Process produces power. Does that make any sense? So you've wrestled because you have doubt. God reveals himself because he's not going to be limited by your doubt. You see how it all connects? Am I making sense? Because you all are kind of quiet tonight. So going through that wrestling process produces that process produces power. Your power is your faith. Your doubt doesn't have to be your downfall. It wasn't Thomas's downfall. Thomas became convicted after Jesus made an appearance to him, because remember, Thomas wasn't there when the other disciples saw him. And even though Thomas was doubtful, he said, I will not believe unless God shows up, Jesus shows up. Thomas is convicted. So there's conditions that Thomas put on what he needed or what he wanted. Was Thomas wrestling? He couldn't believe. How could this be? Especially after the resurrection. How could this be? That's Thomas. Doubt is not your downfall, just as it wasn't Thomas's downfall. It's the birthplace of your declaration. So Thomas is locked up in this house by himself. The disciples had already seen Jesus, and they were hiding out in this house because they were afraid of the Jews. They tell Thomas that they've seen Jesus. Thomas doesn't believe it. Then Thomas puts conditions. He's doubtful. He puts limitations. He puts conditions on what will cause him to believe. But that doubt wasn't his downfall. As a matter of fact, that doubt was the birthplace of his declaration. He says, "My Lord and my God." That's a declaration. That's a declaration of conviction. My Lord, my God. Your doubt is not your downfall. It's the birthplace of your declaration. If we look at verse 29, I hope this is coming together for you guys. This was a little challenging. Jesus said to him, "Thomas, because you have seen me, you have believed." Thomas, because you have seen me, you have believed. Hold on to that thought. Blessed are those who have not seen, yet have believed. Jesus is expanding the blessing to future believers. Faith without sight becomes the standard. And that's essentially the standard in our Christian walk. Faith without sight. And I alluded to this at the beginning of this lesson. We are conditioned to believe it if we see it. But if we don't see it, there's no belief. If we don't see it, it didn't happen. If we didn't see it, it didn't happen. Mature faith trusts without constant evidence. And this is where God is trying to, Jesus is trying to get us through. He's trying to get us to mature faith through this discipleship series. So we've had a couple of series all leading up to this. We had the Lent series, which we just came out of. Lent just brought us all the way up to resurrection. What did we have? We had a series before Lent, which escapes me right now. And so now the resurrection has occurred, and now the Lord is trying to lead us into discipleship. He's trying to mature our faith so that we have trust without constant evidence. And this is one of the things that goes on in society today when it comes to religion versus science. And that's all I'm going to say about that, because that can be a little controversial, and I'm not trying to be controversial tonight. We live in a results-driven environment and a results-driven culture. But faith operates beyond visible proof. Think about that. We live in a results-driven culture. Amen? Is that right? We don't believe it unless we see it. It doesn't make sense if science didn't say it. But faith, which is the evidence of things unseen, operates beyond visible culture. How many of you need to see it to believe it? How many of you don't need to see it? You just need to trust. Okay. About half and half. How many of you are being honest with yourself? Because it doesn't make a difference if you're not being honest with me. You need to be honest with yourself. Where's your buddy today? You don't have anybody to cut up with tonight. Uh, how many of you live by what you see? Uh-huh. How many of you agree with this statement? I do not live by what I see. I live by faith in what God has said. Uh-huh. Where has doubt shown up in your life recently? Oh, I don't know how many of you did you all get the material this week? So you don't even have to answer that question out loud. I just need you to think about it for a minute. Where has doubt shown up in your life recently? What causes people to withdraw when they struggle spiritually? Huh, that's a good question. What causes people to withdraw when they struggle spiritually? What causes you, before you to help you answer that question, think about what causes you to withdraw when you're having a spiritual struggle. Do you isolate? Do you hide like the disciples were hiding? Do you doubt like Thomas was doubting? What causes you to withdraw when you struggle spiritually? Now, here's a profound question. What is the difference between honest doubt and unbelief? Are they mutually exclusive? Do they go hand in hand or are they individual? What is the difference between honest doubt and unbelief? Do you think Thomas had honest doubt or do you think Thomas just didn't believe? Why? Okay. Where are my theologians over here today? What say you? Do you think Thomas had true, honest doubt, or he just didn't believe? Do you think it could have been a combination of both at some level? Don't worry about I don't have your mics turned on. So the live can't hear you. I can hear you, but the live can't hear you. There's a reason why I do that, and that's for you all. It's a disadvantage for the folks on the stream because they can't hear the dialogue. And hopefully they're thinking about the questions, they're thinking about what we're talking about. They do have the opportunity to respond in the chat on both platforms. Tonight we're streaming on Facebook and we're also streaming on YouTube. Yeah, that's still live on YouTube. Now, even although those who signed into YouTube missed about 15 minutes because we had some technical problems, but if they are on Facebook, then they should not have a problem. And I want everybody, and this is for you too, Virtual Church, I want you guys to participate. Put your answers in the chat. I see the chat. I'll rate and I'll answer, and you can communicate back and forth with everybody else in the class in the chat. Well, ooh, they can't see the chat. The moderators can see the chat, and they feed them to me. How has God proven himself to you before? So we've already talked about doubt. We already talked about conditions limiting that we put on God, limits that we put on God. as we go through this faith-building journey. We just asked the question that did you think Thomas had honest doubt or if he truly just had unbelief? We had talked about where you might have struggles causing you to doubt. Which then brings us to this question. How has God proven himself to you before? And step part 2 of that question, did him proving himself to you before help you with doubt that you may have had later?